Imagine a warrior class so powerful, it ruled a nation for 700 years. Their symbol, the curved katana, was said to be the very soul of their identity. They were masters of war, patrons of the arts, and architects of an honor code that would echo for centuries. Then, in just a few short years, they were gone. Their swords were banned, their status was erased, and their entire way of life became a story in the history books. How could such a dominant force just disappear, yet somehow remain so alive in our imagination? The truth is, the samurai were abolished, but they never really left us. They just evolved. Their battlefields changed from rice paddies and castles to movie screens and video games. This is the story of that transformation. From their beginnings as hired guards to their peak as the masters of feudal Japan, from their tragic fall to their explosive rebirth as a global pop culture phenomenon. This is the evolution of the samurai. To find the origin of the samurai, we have to go back to a time of elegance, poetry, and simmering chaos. The Heian period, from 794 to 1185. In the heart of Japan, the city of Kyoto was a world of refined culture. The emperor and his court nobles, like the powerful Fujiwara clan, lived in a bubble of immense privilege, totally detached from the realities of the countryside. They wrote poetry, practiced calligraphy, and worried about complex social rituals. But outside the capital's perfumed halls, Japan was a much more dangerous place. The central government's grip on the provinces was weak. Land was the source of all wealth, and powerful landowners needed to protect their estates from bandits and ambitious neighbors. With no real national police force, they took matters into their own hands. They started to hire and train their own private warriors. These were the proto-samurai. The original word was saburai, which simply meant one who serves. That name tells you everything about their initial status. They weren't the noble philosophical warriors of legend yet. They were hired swords, mounted guards, and provincial enforcers. Their loyalty wasn't to the emperor, but to the wealthy patrons who paid them. And their main skill wasn't the elegant sword duel we picture, but mounted archery. The yumi, the longbow, was their weapon of choice, and on horseback, they were a deadly force. The sword at this point was often a straight-bladed secondary weapon for when things got up close and personal. As these warrior bands grew in skill and number, they formed clans, bound by blood and loyalty. They lived and trained together, creating an identity totally separate from the peasants and the distant court nobles. Slowly, power started to shift away from the capital and into the provinces, concentrating in the hands of these new warrior families. They ran the lands they protected, collected taxes, and settled disputes, basically becoming the local government. The court in Kyoto, busy with its art projects, barely noticed this massive shift in power until it was too late. The seeds of a new Japan had been sown. Two clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, grew so powerful they would soon challenge the emperor himself. The age of the warrior for hire was ending. The age of the warrior ruler was about to begin. By the mid-12th century, the rivalry between the two most powerful samurai clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, exploded into open war. The Genpei War, a brutal 5-year struggle, wasn't just a clash of armies. It was the violent birth of a new Japan. The Taira had managed to worm their way into the imperial court, marrying into the royal family and grabbing high government posts. But their arrogance created a lot of enemies. Minamoto no Yoritomo, whose father had been killed by the Taira, had been spared and exiled as a boy. Now a man, he harnessed all that resentment and called the Minamoto clans to war. The war raged across Japan in a series of legendary battles. The conflict came to a head in 1185 at the naval battle of Dan no Ura. Facing total defeat, the Taira warriors, along with the ladies of the court, threw themselves into the sea rather than be captured. The child emperor and Toku, their claim to legitimacy, drowned with them, and one of Japan's 3 sacred imperial treasures, a sword, was lost to the sea forever. The Minamoto victory was absolute, but Yoritomo wasn't interested in just becoming another noble at court. He knew the luxury of the capital could make a warrior clan soft. So, in 1192, he had the emperor grant him the title of Sei Taishogun, or Shogun for short. He then set up his own capital far from the imperial court in the coastal city of Kamakura. This was the birth of the Bakufu, or tent government, a military dictatorship that would rule Japan for the next 700 years. The emperor was still a divine figurehead, but real power was now in the hands of the shogun and his samurai. Under the Kamakura shogunate, the samurai were transformed. They were no longer just fighters, they were an official ruling class. Yoritomo set up a feudal system, making loyal samurai military governors and estate stewards across the country, rewarding them with land and power. This created a clear chain of command. A samurai was loyal to his lord, or daimyo, who was loyal to the shogun. Samurai culture flourished, emphasizing discipline, loyalty, and martial skill above all else. This new order was put to the test in the late 13th century by 2 massive invasion attempts from the Mongol hordes of Kublai Khan. The samurai rallied to defend Japan, and while they fought with incredible courage, they were ultimately saved by 2 massive typhoons that wrecked the Mongol fleets. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, or divine winds, believing they were a sign of heavenly protection. But the cost of defense was huge. The shogunate had no new land to give out as rewards, and many samurai families were financially ruined. This created deep resentment, weakening the Kamakura government and paving the way for its eventual collapse in 1333. So, what did it really mean to be a samurai? It was more than being a soldier. It was a whole way of life, governed by an unwritten code that would later be called Bushidto, the way of the warrior. The term itself was written down much later, but the core ideas were forged during this period and became the philosophical bedrock of the samurai class. At its heart, Bushidto was about absolute loyalty to your master, fierce courage, and an obsession with personal honor. These ideas were pulled from 3 main sources. From Confucianism, they got the emphasis on loyalty and social order. From Zen Buddhism, many samurai found mental toughness. Zen's focus on meditation and self-discipline helped a warrior stay calm and clear-headed, even in the middle of a battle. And from Japan's native religion, Shinto, came a reverence for ancestors and the spirit of Japan itself. The 7 virtues often tied to Bushido are justice, courage, compassion, respect, integrity, honor, and loyalty. Honor, or moyos, was everything. A samurai's word was his bond, and his reputation was his most valuable asset. Losing your honor was a fate worse than death. This obsession with honor led to the practice of seppuku, a ritual form of suicide by disembowelment. This wasn't seen as an act of surrender, but as a final, terrifying act of will, a way to pay for a failure, protest an injustice, or avoid the shame of being captured. It was the ultimate proof that a samurai controlled his own destiny, even in death. But we have to be careful not to over-romanticize Bushido. It was an ideal, and the reality was often way more complicated and brutal. Samurai were human, capable of incredible treachery and cruelty, just as much as loyalty and bravery. And the ideal samurai wasn't just a brute. He was expected to be cultured, to have a balance of the martial arts, buya, and the literary arts, bun. Many samurai wrote poetry, practiced calligraphy, and mastered the serene ritual of the tea ceremony. The same hand that could wield a sword with deadly skill could also hold a brush to create a beautiful poem. This was the ideal, a warrior whose ferocity was balanced by wisdom, a man of both the sword and the cherry blossom. The stability of the first shogunate didn't last. It shattered, plunging Japan into its darkest and most violent era, the Sengoku Jidai, the Age of Warring States. For about 150 years, the country was broken. The shogun in Kyoto was a shogun in name only, and Japan became a bloody chessboard fought over by powerful feudal lords, the daimyo, all trying to become the supreme ruler. This was an age of constant war, shifting alliances and shocking betrayals. Out of this chaos, three incredible men emerged, who would ultimately put Japan back together again. They are known as the three great Unifiers. The first was Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga was a revolutionary and a tyrant, a man of incredible vision and terrifying cruelty. He saw that the old ways of war were finished. While other clans were stuck on the tradition of one-on-one duels, Nobunaga embraced new tech. He was one of the first Japanese leaders to see the power of firearms. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, he used coordinated volleys of gunfire to wipe out the legendary cavalry of a rival clan, a shocking victory that changed Japanese warfare forever. But in 1582, just as he was about to conquer all of Japan, he was betrayed by one of his own generals. Trapped in a temple in Kyoto, Oda Nobunaga committed seppuku. The man who avenged him was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Nobunaga's most brilliant general. Hideyoshi was born a peasant and rose through the ranks on pure talent, which shows you how much upheaval there was in this era. He quickly crushed the traitor and took his place as Nobunaga's successor. Where Nobunaga ruled with terror, Hideyoshi used political cunning. He finished the job of unification and then created a rigid new class system. He famously ordered a sword hunt to disarm every peasant, making sure that only the samurai could carry weapons. This cemented the samurai as an exclusive warrior elite. But as his power grew, so did his ego. Hideyoshi launched two disastrous invasions of Korea that failed and drained his resources. When he died in 1598, he left behind a young son and a council of 5 powerful regents. This created a new power vacuum, and the most patient and cunning of those regents was about to make his move. His name was Tokugawa Ieyasu. An old ally of Nobunaga, Ieyasu had spent decades quietly building his power. With Hideyoshi gone, tensions finally exploded. On October 21st, 1600, 2 massive armies met at a place called Sekigahara. This would be the largest and most decisive battle in samurai history. Over 160,000 warriors clashed to decide the fate of Japan. Ieyasu was outnumbered, but he had a plan. He'd been secretly cutting deals with some of the enemy commanders. At a key moment, they switched sides and the enemy army collapsed into chaos. The victory for Tokugawa Ieyasu was total. The Sengoku period was over. With his victory at Sekigahara, Tokugawa Ieyasu was the undisputed master of Japan. In 1603, he became shogun, starting a dynasty that would bring an incredible 250 years of peace and stability. This long peace, the Edo period, was a golden age for culture, but for the samurai, it was a gilded cage. The entire foundation of their identity, war was gone. So what happens to a warrior class when there are no more wars to fight? They were forced to change. Under the strict Tokugawa government, they went from being warriors to being civil administrators and bureaucrats. Their swords, once tools of war, became symbols of status, a reminder of a glory they no longer had. This created a huge identity crisis. A samurai's income was a fixed stipend of rice paid by his lord. But as the Edo period went on, a new merchant economy boomed. The merchant class, once at the very bottom of the social ladder, grew rich and powerful, while many samurai, with their fixed incomes, struggled with debt. They were the elite in name, but often not in reality. It was during this long peace that the idea of Bushidto was really formalized and romanticized. With the brutal reality of war just a memory, writers looked back at the Sengoku period as a heroic age. The ideal of the selfless, loyal warrior became a powerful model for all of Japanese society. Figures like the legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi became cultural heroes. For over 2 centuries, the Tokugawa Shogunate kept its power through a policy of strict isolation, or sakoku. Foreign trade was almost completely cut off. This policy kept the peace, but it also left Japan technologically and militarily behind the rest of the world. That fragile peace was shattered in 1853. A fleet of American steamships, the Black Ships, led by Commodore Matthew Perry, sailed into Edo Bay. Belching smoke and armed with powerful cannons, they were a shocking display of Western power. The shogun's government, totally unable to fight back, was forced to sign treaties that opened Japan up to foreign trade. This humiliation exposed just how weak the shogunate had become and lit a fire of nationalism. A powerful movement rose up with the slogan, "Sono Joy." Revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. Ironically, this movement was led by ambitious, lower-ranking samurai from powerful outer regions. They argued that the shogun had failed Japan and that power needed to be restored to the emperor. The gilded cage was about to break, and the samurai themselves were holding the key, about to unlock the end of their own era. The arrival of the West set off a political earthquake. In 1868, reformist samurai fighting under the banner of the emperor overthrew the Tokugawa Shogunate. This was the Meiji Restoration, a revolution that would launch Japan from a feudal society into a modern, industrialized nation at a dizzying speed. The young Emperor Meiji was put back in charge, and his new government, staffed by the same samurai who led the revolution, immediately started a radical program of modernization. Their first target was the very feudal system that created them. The Meiji leaders knew that to compete with the West, Japan needed a modern army. In 1872, they created a national army based on conscription. For the first time, commoners were trained as soldiers, armed with modern rifles. Just like that, the samurai's exclusive right to fight was gone. The final symbolic blow came in 1876. The Haitorai Edict banned the wearing of swords in public. The 2 swords were the badge of rank, the privilege, the very soul of the samurai. Forbidding them was like stripping the samurai of their identity. Stripped of their purpose, their income, and their rights, the 2 million members of the samurai class were dissolved. Many adapted, using their education to become leaders in the new government and industries. But many more were left broke and disillusioned. This resentment boiled over into a series of samurai rebellions. The last and most famous was the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by one of the most respected heroes of the Restoration, Saigō Takamori. Saigō had helped overthrow the shogun, but he grew disgusted with how the new government was casting aside the warrior class. He became the reluctant leader of a rebellion of traditional samurai from his home of Satsuma. For months, Saigō's army of traditional warriors fought bravely against the new imperial army of conscripts, but the outcome was never in doubt. At the final battle of Shiroyama, Saigō and his last few hundred samurai were surrounded by 30,000 government troops with modern rifles and artillery. Outgunned and outnumbered, they made one last hopeless charge. Saigō was fatally wounded and his remaining followers were cut down. The rebellion was crushed. The last stand of the samurai was over. The samurai may have vanished from the battlefield, but their ideals took on a new life, stronger than steel and far more enduring. Today, their code of honor, Bushidto, is not bound by armor or battlefield. It lives on in quiet discipline, in the courage to do what is right even when it is hard, in the loyalty to a cause greater than oneself. The world may no longer need warriors with swords, but it will always need people with courage, with principle, with purpose. In that way, the spirit of the samurai was never defeated. It simply changed its form and kept walking forward with the times. This was not just the end of an era, it was the beginning of a legacy.